Life in prison without parole. Maybe that'll teach you people some respect. Judge Harrison Wells slams his gavel down with the force of a gunshot. The sound echoes through the packed federal courthouse like thunder. 19-year-old Marcus Thompson staggers backward, his legs nearly giving out. The valedictorian pin on his lapel catches the harsh fluorescent light, a cruel reminder of dreams now shattered. His grandmother screams from the gallery, "No! Please, not my baby!" The courtroom erupts. People jump to their feet, shouting over each other. Reporters frantically scribble notes. Marcus's public defender stares in horror, her briefcase tumbling to the floor, papers scattering everywhere. Life in prison. For asking to be served coffee like any other customer. Marcus was supposed to start Harvard in the fall. Instead, he's heading to a cell for the rest of his life. The gavel has fallen, but justice is about to walk through those courtroom doors in a way no one saw coming. Have you ever witnessed a moment that changes everything? 3 days earlier, Marcus Thompson stood on the stage of Theodore Roosevelt High School, adjusting his cap and gown as Principal Martinez handed him the valedictorian medal. The auditorium erupted in applause. His grandmother Eleanor wiped tears from her eyes in the front row, her weathered hands clutching a tissue. "This young man represents the very best of our community," Principal Martinez announced into the microphone. Harvard-bound with a full scholarship, Marcus plans to study law and follow in the footsteps of civil rights pioneers. Marcus smiled, his dark eyes sparkling with hope. At 19, he carried himself with quiet dignity, the kind that comes from overcoming obstacles through sheer determination. His grandmother had raised him alone in a small apartment in Southeast D.C. after his mother died when he was 7. They survived on her Social Security and his part-time job at a local law firm, where he filed papers and dreamed of one day arguing cases in the Supreme Court. What Marcus didn't know was that his father was very much alive. David Thompson, the United States Attorney General, sat in his corner office 20 miles away, signing papers that would affect millions of Americans. At 52, he commanded respect in every room he entered. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled, his navy suit impeccably tailored. On his mahogany desk sat framed photos of him with presidents, senators, and Supreme Court justices. Hidden in his locked drawer was a single photograph, a faded picture of him as a young law student holding a newborn baby. The woman beside him, Eleanor's daughter Maria, smiled with exhaustion and joy. David's eyes in the photo held a tenderness that few people had ever seen. 20 years ago, when David was an ambitious federal prosecutor with political dreams, Maria had made him a promise. "Go," she had whispered from her hospital bed after Marcus's birth. "Change the world. But don't look back. A poor black family will destroy your career before it even starts." He had left that night, believing it was temporary. Political success would give him the power to help families like theirs. But Maria died in a car accident when Marcus was 7, and Eleanor made David swear to stay away. "He needs to make his own path," she insisted, "without the burden of your world." For 12 years, David sent anonymous donations through a lawyer, marked only as community assistance. He never knew the money was helping to raise his own son. Meanwhile, Judge Harrison Wells prepared for what he hoped would be his final weeks on the federal bench. At 58, Wells had served 23 years as a judge, building a reputation for harsh sentences that pleased conservative politicians. His office walls displayed photos with Republican senators, letters of commendation, and newspaper clippings praising his tough-on-crime approach. Wells was bitter. Despite his long service, he had been passed over for promotion to the Court of Appeals 3 times. This time felt different, though. The Attorney General's office had scheduled a meeting to discuss his nomination. Wells believed his harsh sentencing record, particularly his treatment of young black defendants, would finally earn him the recognition he deserved. What Wells didn't know was that his resentment ran deeper than ambition. 20 years earlier, federal prosecutor David Thompson had destroyed his family. David had prosecuted Wells's younger brother, Robert, for embezzling campaign funds from a Senate race. The case was airtight. Robert had stolen nearly $500,000 and left a paper trail that even the best lawyers couldn't explain away. Robert received 5 years in federal prison and died of a heart attack 6 months into his sentence. Wells blamed David Thompson for his brother's death, though he had never spoken the prosecutor's name aloud since the trial ended. The morning after Marcus's graduation, he decided to celebrate at Heritage Coffee, an upscale cafe in Georgetown where law students and political staffers gathered to discuss cases over expensive lattes. Marcus had saved money from his part-time job for this one indulgence, a celebration coffee before starting his new chapter. The cafe buzzed with the usual morning crowd. Young professionals in tailored suits typed on laptops while sipping artisanal drinks. Marcus approached the polished marble counter, his valedictorian pin still attached to his jacket lapel. He had worn it every day since graduation, a symbol of hope and achievement. Behind the counter, 22-year-old Ashley Parker rolled her eyes as Marcus approached. Ashley had grown up in McLean, Virginia, where her father owned 3 luxury car dealerships. She worked at Heritage Coffee during her gap year before starting at Georgetown, though she spent most shifts scrolling through social media on her phone. "Can I help you?" Ashley asked without looking up from her phone, her voice flat with disinterest. "I'd like a medium coffee, please," Marcus said politely. "Whatever your house blend is." Ashley glanced up briefly, took in Marcus's appearance, and returned to her phone. "We're out." Marcus looked confused. The cafe was clearly brewing coffee. He could smell it, see steam rising from the machines behind her. Other customers were walking away with fresh cups. "Out of coffee?" "But out of your kind of coffee," Ashley interrupted, her voice louder now. Several customers turned to look. "Maybe try the McDonald's down the street." "It's more your speed." The cafe fell quiet. Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks, but he maintained his composure. "I'm a paying customer," he said calmly. "I just graduated as valedictorian and I'm starting Harvard in the fall. I just want a coffee to celebrate." Ashley smirked and called over her shoulder, "Kyle! We've got a situation up here." Kyle Morrison, the 26-year-old manager, emerged from the back office. Kyle had attended private school in Bethesda and viewed his job at Heritage Coffee as networking rather than work. His father was a lobbyist on K Street, and Kyle planned to join the family business after gaining some real-world experience in retail. "What's the problem?" Kyle asked, his tone already dismissive as he looked at Marcus. "This guy is making our customers uncomfortable," Ashley said, gesturing toward Marcus. "He's being aggressive and demanding service when I told him we're out of his type of coffee." Marcus's jaw tightened. Around him, other customers whispered and stared, some recorded with their phones. "I'm not being aggressive," Marcus said, his voice steady despite his rising anger. "I simply asked for coffee, and was told I couldn't have any because of my kind." Kyle stepped closer, invading Marcus's personal space. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. You're disrupting our business and making our staff uncomfortable." "I haven't raised my voice or done anything wrong," Marcus replied. "I just want the same service as any other customer." Kyle pulled out his phone. "Either you leave now or I'm calling the police for trespassing and disturbing the peace." Marcus looked around the cafe. Every face stared back at him with a mixture of curiosity and judgment. He thought about walking away, about choosing his battles. But something in Ashley's smirk, in Kyle's threatening posture, in the way other customers watched like he was entertainment, made him stand his ground. "Call them," Marcus said quietly. "I'll wait right here for them to arrive. I want to see you explain to officers why asking for coffee is disturbing the peace." Kyle dialed 911 with theatrical flourish. "Yes, I need police at Heritage Coffee on M Street. We have an individual who's threatening our staff and refusing to leave when asked." Marcus stood perfectly still, his hands visible, his voice calm when the officers arrived 15 minutes later. But Officer Bradley Carter and Officer Maria Santos saw only what Kyle and Ashley described, a young black man who had refused to comply with a reasonable request to leave. The police report would later describe Marcus as belligerent and non-compliant, though the cafe's security cameras told a different story. Unfortunately, those cameras would mysteriously malfunction before the footage could be reviewed. As handcuffs clicked around Marcus's wrists, he caught sight of his reflection in the cafe's window. The valedictorian pin on his lapel gleamed mockingly in the morning sun. Judge Harrison Wells arrived at the federal courthouse with unusual enthusiasm. He had specifically requested Marcus Thompson's case, telling his clerk it would demonstrate proper consequences for entitled youth. Sarah Mitchell rushed through the hallways clutching 83 case files. She had barely read Marcus's file routine disorderly conduct, 30 days community service, 15 minutes maximum. She had no idea she was walking into a judicial execution. Marcus sat in his only suit, valedictorian pin gleaming under harsh fluorescent lights. Eleanor whispered prayers in the gallery, her weathered hands trembling. All rise for the Honorable Judge Harrison Wells. Wells entered like a storm cloud, black robes flowing behind him. His predatory eyes locked onto Marcus immediately, something dark flickering across his face. "Mr. Thompson," Wells began before Sarah could speak, "I've been anticipating this case." Sarah blinked. Anticipating a misdemeanor plea? Wells examined Marcus's file with theatrical slowness. Valedictorian. Harvard-bound. How impressive. The word dripped with contempt. "Do your achievements give you the right to terrorize businesses?" "Your Honor," Sarah interjected, "my client is pleading." "I'm addressing the defendant." Wells's voice cut like steel. "Mr. Thompson, stand and answer." Marcus rose, jaw tight but voice respectful. "No, Your Honor." "No what? That actions don't have consequences? You disrupted an establishment, became belligerent when asked to leave." "That's not what happened," Marcus said firmly. "I was denied service because of my race." The courtroom murmured. Wells's gavel exploded like gunfire. "Order. Are you calling business owners liars?" "I'm telling the truth." Wells's face flushed crimson. "Truth? You represent everything wrong with entitled youth today. Your diploma doesn't give you the right to intimidate employees and disrupt commerce." Sarah found her voice. "Your Honor, this is simple trespassing." The prosecution agreed. "I set sentences here, Ms. Mitchell, not prosecutors." Wells glared at Marcus. "Your file shows disturbing patterns." Marcus looked confused. "What patterns?" "I've never been arrested." Wells shuffled papers dramatically. "Jaywalking tickets, multiple violations, clear disregard for law escalating to commercial terrorism." "Commercial terrorism?" Sarah gasped. "He asked for coffee." "He disrupted interstate commerce through systematic intimidation. Under federal statute 18 U.S.C. 2331, this constitutes domestic terrorism." The gallery erupted. Eleanor clutched her chest. Even Prosecutor Jennifer Hayes looked uncomfortable. "Your Honor," Hayes said hesitantly, "our recommendation is 30 days community service." "Ms. Hayes, I determine sentences based on crime severity and the defendant's obvious lack of remorse." Wells turned to Marcus with vicious satisfaction. "Anything to say before sentencing?" Marcus straightened, voice steady despite the madness. "Your Honor, with respect, I committed no crime. I requested equal service and was denied because of skin color. If equality is terrorism, this country has lost its soul." Wells's face contorted with rage. "Contempt! This arrogant attitude proves my point." He raised his gavel high, pausing for maximum drama. The courtroom held its breath. "Marcus Thompson, I sentence you to life in prison without parole." Thunder crashed as the gavel fell. Eleanor's scream shattered the silence. "No! Please, not my baby!" Chaos erupted. People jumped up shouting. Reporters scribbled frantically. Sarah's briefcase tumbled, papers scattering like dying leaves across marble floors. Marcus stood frozen, knees buckling. His valedictorian pin mocked him now, dreams dying in federal prison. "Animals like you belong in cages, not coffee shops," Wells sneered, his mask finally dropping completely. The bailiff moved toward Marcus with shackles. Eleanor collapsed in the gallery, other spectators catching her before she hit the floor. Civil rights activists in the back row shouted about injustice, while court security moved to restore order. "This is America in 2024, someone yelled from the gallery before being escorted out. Marcus turned toward his grandmother, mouthing, "I love you," as metal cuffs clicked around his wrists. The Harvard acceptance letter in his jacket pocket crinkled as the bailiff grabbed his arm. Wells gathered his robes with satisfied smugness. "Perhaps this will send a clear message about respecting authority and law." Sarah Mitchell stood paralyzed, legal briefs scattered at her feet like shattered dreams. In 26 years of life, she had never witnessed such judicial cruelty. As Marcus was led toward the door marked "Detention," he caught his reflection in the courthouse windows. The morning sun illuminated his valedictorian pin one last time before he disappeared into the corridor leading to federal lockup. Outside in the parking garage, a black SUV with government plates remained parked in the shadows. The man inside checked his phone again, waiting for a call that would change everything. The gavel had fallen. Justice was supposed to be blind. But sometimes, justice has a father. The courthouse erupted as bailiffs moved toward Marcus. Eleanor collapsed in the gallery, her weathered hands clutching her chest. "Please, he's all I have left," she screamed. "His father would never forgive me if—" She stopped abruptly, covering her mouth with trembling fingers. Judge Wells paused, his cold eyes narrowing. "His father? I thought there was no father in the picture." Eleanor's face went pale. I misspoke. I meant if his father were alive to see this." Marcus looked confused, studying his grandmother's panicked expression. She had always avoided talking about his father, always changing the subject when he asked questions. Wells smirked with satisfaction. "Another fatherless young man. Exactly what I expected." He waved dismissively at the bailiffs. "Remove him." But Eleanor's slip had planted a seed of curiosity that would soon bloom into revelation. Cliffhanger number 1. The phone call. Wells's phone buzzed against the bench. A text from the Attorney General's office glowed on the screen. "Meeting moved to 2 p.m. today. Senate confirmation hearing next week. Clean record essential. No controversies." Wells smiled as he read the message. This harsh sentence would demonstrate his commitment to law and order. Conservative senators loved judges who were tough on urban crime. His promotion to the Court of Appeals was finally within reach. He had no idea that his clean record was about to be shattered by the very man whose approval he sought. Cliffhanger number 2. The holding cell revelation. 20 minutes later, Marcus sat in the courthouse, holding cell, still wearing his graduation suit. The metal bench felt cold against his back as reality crashed down around him. Harvard. Law school. His dreams of becoming a civil rights attorney all gone because he asked for coffee. He was allowed one phone call before transport to federal detention. His fingers shook as he dialed his grandmother's number. "Grandma? What did you mean about my father?" Marcus asked when she answered, her voice thick with tears. Eleanor Thompson had kept this secret for 19 years. Through Marcus's childhood questions, through graduations and achievements, through lonely nights when he wondered why he had no father. She had promised Maria on her deathbed, promised David for his career, and promised herself for Marcus's protection. But watching her grandson sentenced to die in prison changed everything. "Baby," she whispered, her voice breaking, "your father didn't abandon us. He's David Thompson." Marcus felt the world tilt. David Thompson? Like a relative? "The U.S. Attorney General, baby. David Thompson is your father." The phone nearly slipped from Marcus's numb fingers. "The Attorney General? You've been lying to me for 19 years. Not lying, protecting. When your mama died, I made him promise to stay away. A poor black family would destroy his political future. He sends money every month through a lawyer, but he doesn't know it's for you specifically." Marcus stared at the concrete wall, processing the impossible. The most powerful law enforcement official in America was his father, and he was sitting in jail, sentenced to life by a racist judge. Cliffhanger number 3. Media explosion. Within an hour, word of the outrageous sentence began spreading through social media. A civil rights lawyer in the gallery had live tweeted the entire proceeding. The hashtag #LifeForCoffee exploded across Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Local news vans surrounded the courthouse. CNN interrupted regular programming. MSNBC legal analysts called it the most shocking judicial abuse in modern history. Rather than reconsidering his decision, Judge Wells doubled down. He stepped outside the courthouse for an impromptu press conference, his ego feeding off the attention. "This sentence sends a clear message," Wells declared to the cameras, his voice full of righteous authority. "These entitled graduates think their diplomas give them license to terrorize businesses and resist lawful authority. I won't be intimidated by mob justice or social media outrage." A reporter shouted a question. "Judge Wells, don't you think life in prison is excessive for a coffee shop incident?" Wells's face hardened. It wasn't a coffee shop incident. It was domestic terrorism. This defendant systematically disrupted interstate commerce, threatened employees, and showed complete disregard for law and order. His attitude in my courtroom proved he's a danger to society. Another reporter pressed, "But he's a valedictorian headed to Harvard." "Which makes him more dangerous, not less," Wells interrupted. "Educated criminals are the worst kind. They know better, yet they choose chaos. This sentence will deter other potential terrorists who think education gives them immunity." The press conference was broadcast live across every major network. Civil rights organizations issued statements condemning the sentence. Legal scholars called for Wells's immediate removal from the bench. But in his arrogance, Wells saw only validation. His phone rang with congratulatory calls from conservative commentators praising his courage and moral clarity. Cliffhanger number 4. The Attorney General's office. 25 miles away, David Thompson sat in his corner office reviewing briefing papers for an international terrorism case. At 52, he had seen every form of injustice imaginable, but nothing prepared him for the call that would shatter his world. His secretary knocked and entered hesitantly. "Sir, there's an elderly woman on line 3. She says it's urgent and personal." "A Mrs. Eleanor Thompson?" David's pen froze mid-signature. Eleanor Thompson. He hadn't heard that name in 12 years, not since Maria's funeral when Eleanor had made him promise to stay away from Marcus forever. "Sir?" his secretary pressed. "Should I take a message?" David's hand trembled as he reached for the phone. "Put her through." Eleanor's voice was thick with tears and desperation. "David, it's Eleanor. Your son needs you." The words hit David like physical blows. What? Eleanor, what are you talking about?" "Marcus, he's your son, David. And he's about to spend his life in federal prison for asking to be served coffee like any human being deserves." David's world stopped spinning. The briefing papers slipped from his hands, scattering across his mahogany desk. "Marcus, my son. But you said, you made me promise. I was protecting you both. But I can't protect him from this. They gave him life without parole, David. Life. For wanting coffee while black. David's voice cracked like a teenager's. 19 years. I have a 19-year-old son. A son who just graduated valedictorian. A son who dreams of being a civil rights lawyer like his father. A son who's about to die in federal prison because a racist judge wanted to make an example. Cliffhanger number 5. The investigation begins. David's training as a federal prosecutor kicked in immediately. Through his tears, his mind began working like the legal machine that had made him Attorney General. Eleanor, what judge handled the case? Harrison Wells. David's blood turned to ice. Harrison Wells, the man whose brother he had prosecuted 20 years ago for campaign embezzlement. The brother who died in federal prison 6 months into his sentence. David had wondered why Wells never responded to his promotion recommendation requests. Now he understood. Wells had been carrying a 20-year grudge, waiting for the perfect moment for revenge. And he had found it in Marcus David's son that he didn't even know existed. "Get me everything on Judge Harrison Wells," David barked to his chief of staff as Eleanor sobbed on the phone. "Every case, every sentence, every communication. I want his entire judicial record on my desk in 30 minutes. Sir, your 2 p.m. meeting with Judge Wells about his Court of Appeals nomination." David's voice cut like a blade. "Cancel it. Cancel everything. And get the FBI legal team down here now." As his staff scrambled to execute orders, David stared at the locked drawer where he kept the only photograph of himself with Marcus, a newborn baby he had held for exactly 17 minutes before walking away to build his career. The final revelation. Within 25 minutes, David's team had uncovered a devastating pattern. Wells had sentenced black defendants to terms averaging 287% longer than white defendants for identical crimes. His prejudice wasn't hidden. It was systematic, documented, and legally actionable. More damning were the email communications between Wells and prosecutor Jennifer Hayes, discussing how to make an example of Marcus Thompson specifically. Wells had manipulated the case assignment system to ensure he would handle Marcus's sentencing personally. David studied the evidence with prosecutorial precision, his personal anguish transforming into professional fury. Wells had used the federal bench as a weapon of racial revenge, and Marcus, his own son, was the ultimate target. "Sir," his deputy attorney general said quietly, "there's something else. Judge Wells's 2 p.m. appointment today? He was coming here for you to recommend his promotion to the Court of Appeals." David's jaw tightened as the full scope of Wells's arrogance became clear. The man who had just sentenced his son to die in prison expected to be promoted by the very father he had targeted. David stood, straightening his tie with deadly calm. "Change of plans. Tell Judge Wells his appointment is still on, but instead of a promotion meeting, he's about to meet the father of the young man he just tried to destroy." Outside the courthouse, the black SUV started its engine and began the 25-minute drive that would change American justice forever. At 2:47 p.m., Judge Harrison Wells sat in the courthouse parking garage inside his silver Lexus, adjusting his tie in the rearview mirror. In 13 minutes, he would walk into the Attorney General's office for the most important meeting of his career. His phone buzzed with congratulatory messages from conservative commentators praising his courageous sentence. Fox News had already booked him for an evening interview about standing firm against judicial activism. His harsh treatment of Marcus Thompson was being hailed as exactly the kind of law and order leadership the Court of Appeals needed. Wells smiled with satisfaction. 20 years of judicial service, 20 years of waiting for recognition, and finally, his moment had arrived. He had no idea that his moment would be his last. The Attorney General's realization. David Thompson sat in his corner office, surrounded by evidence that would destroy Wells's career and potentially send him to prison. FBI legal analysts worked frantically at conference tables covered with case files, sentencing records, and email communications. The pattern was undeniable. Wells had systematically targeted black defendants for excessive sentences while showing leniency to white defendants who committed identical crimes. The Marcus Thompson case wasn't an aberration. It was the culmination of 2 decades of judicial racism. But the personal betrayal cut deeper than the professional misconduct. David opened his locked drawer and pulled out the faded photograph himself as a young prosecutor, holding newborn Marcus, while Maria smiled weakly from her hospital bed. 19 years ago, he had walked away believing it was temporary. Success would give him power to help families like theirs. Instead, his success had made him a target. Wells had spent 20 years planning revenge for his brother's legitimate prosecution, and Marcus David's son, who didn't even know his father existed, had become the ultimate weapon in that revenge. "Sir," his deputy said quietly, "Judge Wells has arrived. He's being escorted up now." David stood, straightening his jacket. His personal anguish transformed into prosecutorial steel. "Send him in, and make sure the FBI recording equipment is active." The confrontation begins. Wells entered the Attorney General's office with supreme confidence, his judicial robes replaced by an expensive Navy suit. The mahogany-paneled office intimidated most visitors, but Wells felt he belonged here, finally ascending to the inner circles of power. "Attorney General Thompson," Wells said, extending his hand with practiced political charm. "Thank you for making time in your busy schedule." David didn't shake the offered hand. Instead, he studied Wells with the cold precision of a predator examining prey. "Judge Wells, please have a seat." Wells settled into the leather chair across from David's desk, his eyes taking in the framed photographs with presidents and Supreme Court justices. Soon, he thought, his own photo would join this collection. David remained standing, his silence stretching uncomfortably. Wells shifted nervously, his confidence beginning to crack. "I understand you're here about a Court of Appeals recommendation," David said finally, his voice dangerously calm. "Yes, sir. I believe my record speaks for itself. 23 years of faithful service, consistently tough sentences that send clear messages about law and order." David's jaw tightened. "Tell me about your sentencing record, Judge Wells." Wells pretended with pride. "I'm particularly proud of my work with juvenile offenders and repeat criminals. Just this morning, I sentenced a domestic terrorist to life without parole. A clear example of the decisive leadership the Court of Appeals needs." "Domestic terrorist?" David's voice remained level, but his knuckles went white as they gripped the desk edge. "Marcus Thompson, 19-year-old troublemaker who terrorized a Georgetown coffee shop, threatened employees, and showed complete contempt for authority in my courtroom." Wells leaned forward eagerly. "The liberal media is crying about it, but sometimes justice requires courage." David felt something snap inside his chest. The man sitting across from him, this racist, vengeful judge, was describing his son as a terrorist while expecting a promotion for destroying an innocent young man's life. "Harrison," David said quietly, using Wells's first name for the first time. "Do you remember the Thompson family?" Wells looked confused by the personal tone. "Thompson? It's a common name. 20 years ago. You remember the Thompson family very well." Something flickered in Wells's eyes. Recognition, then fear, the power reversal. David walked around his desk slowly, each step deliberate and threatening. "Marcus Thompson, the 19-year-old domestic terrorist you sentenced to life in prison this morning. Tell me more about him." Wells's confidence began cracking. He was clearly guilty of commercial terrorism. The evidence was overwhelming." "What evidence?" "That he asked for coffee while black. He threatened staff, disrupted business, showed flagrant disrespect." David slammed his hand on the desk with explosive force. That domestic terrorist is my son." The words echoed through the office like gunshots. Wells's face went completely white, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Your son? My son, Harrison. The son you sentenced to die in federal prison for the crime of asking to be treated like a human being. David's voice was deadly calm now, more terrifying than shouting. The son you targeted for revenge against me. Wells's hands began shaking. I had no idea. I didn't know. Didn't know what? That Marcus Thompson was my son? Or didn't know that your 20-year vendetta against me would lead you to destroy an innocent teenager's life? The full scope of Wells's miscalculation began crashing down on him. He had sentenced the Attorney General's son to life in prison, expecting a promotion from the same man whose child he had tried to destroy. David, please, I can explain. Explain what? How have you spent 20 years carrying a grudge because I prosecuted your brother for crimes he actually committed? How have you systematically sentenced black defendants to harsher punishments while showing leniency to white criminals? David opened a thick folder and began reading statistics with prosecutorial precision. In 23 years on the bench, black defendants received sentences averaging 287% longer than white defendants for identical crimes. Your racism isn't hidden, Harrison. It's documented, systematic, and legally actionable. Wells tried to stand, his legs shaking. This is a misunderstanding. Sit down. David's command carried the authority of the nation's top law enforcement officer. Wells collapsed back into his chair like a deflated balloon. The evidence presentation. David continued his methodical destruction. FBI analysis of your email communications with prosecutors shows a clear pattern of manipulation. You specifically requested Marcus's case, discussing how to make an example of him. He pulled out printed emails, throwing them across the desk. You wrote, and I quote, "Young black males with education are the most dangerous criminals because they think they're entitled to special treatment." Wells stared at the evidence of his own words, his face ashen. You manipulated the case assignment system to ensure you would personally handle my son's sentencing. You turned a misdemeanor trespassing charge into federal terrorism charges. You sentenced a valedictorian to life in prison for asking for coffee. David's voice grew more intense with each revelation. But the most damning evidence, Harrison, is your complete lack of awareness. You destroyed my son's life as revenge against me, then came here expecting me to promote you for it. The moment of recognition. Wells looked up with desperate eyes. David, please. If I had known he was your son. If you had known. David's voice cracked with fury. So you admit you would have treated him differently if you knew he was connected to me? That proves exactly what kind of judge you are, one who dispenses justice based on personal connections rather than law. The truth hit Wells like a physical blow. His racism had been so automatic, so systematic, that he had destroyed the one person guaranteed to expose him to the man whose approval he needed most. Marcus Thompson is everything you pretended to hate about today's youth, David continued relentlessly. He's educated, articulate, dignified, and black. Your prejudice couldn't tolerate the existence of someone who shattered your racist stereotypes, so you decided to destroy him. Wells began crying, not from remorse, but from terror at his career collapsing. Please, David, we can fix this. I can reduce the sentence, claim new evidence. Fix this? David's laugh was cold as winter steel. Harrison, you sentenced my 19-year-old son to die in federal prison for asking to be served coffee like any other human being. There is no fixing this. The father's fury. David leaned across his desk, his voice dropping to a whisper that was more terrifying than shouting. Do you have children, Harrison? Wells nodded weakly. Then imagine someone took your child's entire future and crushed it into nothing because of the color of their skin. Imagine your child valedictorian, Harvard-bound, dreaming of serving justice sentenced to die in a cage for demanding basic human dignity. Tears ran down Wells's cheeks as the full weight of his actions finally penetrated his consciousness. Marcus has spent 19 years wondering why his father abandoned him. I've spent 19 years believing I was protecting him by staying away. Today, we both learned that my absence couldn't protect him from people like you. David straightened, his professional composure returning like armor. Judge Harrison Wells, you are hereby suspended from the federal bench pending full investigation by the Department of Justice. FBI agents are currently searching your offices and seizing all records related to your sentencing patterns. Wells started to protest, but David held up his hand. Furthermore, the Civil Rights Division will be filing federal charges against you for violation of civil rights under color of authority, judicial misconduct, and conspiracy to deny equal protection under law. The final revelation. David walked to his office door and opened it. FBI agents stood waiting in the hallway, along with federal marshals.
But David,
Wells whimpered,
you don't understand the pressure I was under.
The political expectations, the need to appear tough. No, Harrison, you don't understand. David's voice carried final judgment. In 30 minutes, I'm walking into that courthouse to see my son for the first time in 19 years. I'm going to look into the eyes of the young man whose life you tried to destroy and tell him that his father is here. Wells was escorted from the office in handcuffs, his 23-year judicial career ending in the same building where he had expected to receive the promotion of his dreams. David stood alone in his office, staring at the photograph of himself holding newborn Marcus. Outside, a convoy of federal vehicles prepared to drive to the courthouse where real justice, was about to be served. The son he had never known was about to meet the father who would move heaven and earth to save him. At 3:42 p.m., the federal courthouse doors burst open with the force of justice itself. David Thompson strode through the marble hallway flanked by FBI agents and federal marshals, their footsteps echoing like thunder through the halls where his son had been condemned just hours earlier. The courthouse buzzed with chaos. News crews had multiplied, their cameras tracking every movement. Civil rights activists chanted in the plaza outside. Court staff whispered frantically about rumors that Judge Wells had been arrested at the Attorney General's office. David's jaw was set with prosecutorial determination, but his hands trembled slightly. A father about to meet the son he had never known. Immediate justice. The emergency hearing was called to order in the same courtroom where Marcus had been sentenced. Chief Judge Maria Rodriguez, a respected jurist with 30 years of experience, had assumed jurisdiction within minutes of Wells's arrest. Marcus sat in the defendant's chair, still wearing his graduation suit, his valedictorian pin catching the late afternoon light. Eleanor clutched a tissue in the gallery, her weathered face etched with hope and terror. The courtroom doors opened, and David Thompson entered with the authority of the nation's top law enforcement officer. For the first time in 19 years, father and son occupied the same room. Marcus looked up, recognition flickering in his dark eyes. He had seen this man on television countless times, the Attorney General who fought for civil rights, who prosecuted hate crimes, who spoke eloquently about justice and equality. He had no idea he was looking at his father. "Your Honor," David announced, his voice carrying absolute authority, "the United States Department of Justice formally requests immediate dismissal of all charges against Marcus Thompson with prejudice." The gallery erupted in whispers. Judge Rodriguez banged her gavel for order. David continued with prosecutorial precision. "Furthermore, we request vacation of the sentence imposed by Judge Harrison Wells, who has been arrested on federal charges including civil rights violations, judicial misconduct, and conspiracy to deny equal protection under law." Marcus stared in disbelief. The Attorney General of the United States was personally intervening in his case? "Mr. Attorney General," Judge Rodriguez said carefully, "these are highly unusual circumstances. What evidence supports these extraordinary requests?" David opened a thick folder. Judge Wells systematically sentenced black defendants to terms averaging 287% longer than white defendants for identical crimes. FBI analysis revealed email communications showing deliberate manipulation of case assignments and sentencing guidelines based on racial bias. He pulled out printed documents. In Mr. Thompson's specific case, Judge Wells wrote to prosecutors about making an example of educated black males who think they're entitled to special treatment. This was not justice. It was racial persecution under color of law. The courtroom fell silent except for the clicking of news cameras capturing every word. Judge Rodriguez studied the evidence with judicial precision. "Mr. Thompson, please stand." Marcus rose slowly, his legs still shaking from hours of emotional trauma. "After reviewing the evidence presented by the Department of Justice, I find that your case was tainted by judicial bias and prosecutorial misconduct from its inception." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "All charges against you are hereby dismissed with prejudice." The sentence imposed by Judge Wells is vacated immediately. You are free to go. The gavel fell with the sound of justice restored. The family reunion. Eleanor's scream of joy pierced the courtroom. "Thank you, Jesus! Thank you." Marcus stood frozen, hardly believing his nightmare was over. Harvard, law school, his dreams all restored in an instant. But as the courtroom erupted in applause, his eyes remained fixed on the Attorney General who had saved his life. Something about the man's face seemed familiar beyond television appearances. David approached slowly, his professional composure cracking as fatherly emotion threatened to overwhelm him. "Marcus," he said quietly, his voice barely audible above the celebration around them. "Sir," Marcus replied respectfully, "I don't know how to thank you for—" "You don't need to thank me." David's voice cracked like a teenager's. "You're my son." The words hung in the air between them. Marcus's face went through a dozen emotions. Confusion, disbelief, recognition, and finally understanding. "My father?" Marcus whispered. David nodded, tears running down his cheeks for the first time in 20 years of public service. "I'm so sorry, Marcus. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry it took this to bring us together. I'm sorry you had to face this alone." Marcus stared at the man who had shaped American law enforcement policy, who had prosecuted hate crimes across the nation, who had just demolished a federal judge to save him. "You're really my father?" "I am. And I am so incredibly proud of you." Eleanor approached them slowly, tears streaming down her weathered face. For 19 years, she had kept this secret to protect them both. "I'm sorry," she whispered to David. "I thought I was protecting you both." David pulled Eleanor into an embrace that spanned 2 decades of separation. "We all made choices we thought were right. But this," he looked at Marcus, "this ends now. No more secrets, no more protection. We're a family." Marcus looked between his father and grandmother, his world reshaping itself around this impossible truth. "I thought you abandoned us. I thought I was protecting you by staying away. I was wrong." David's voice carried the weight of 19 years of regret. "But I'm here now, and I will never let anyone hurt you again." The aftermath. Outside the courthouse, news crews captured the moment America's top law enforcement officer embraced the son he had never known. The footage would be replayed millions of times, a symbol of justice delayed but not denied. Judge Wells was processed at federal detention, his 23-year career ending in the same system where he had sent countless innocent people. His harsh sentences were being reviewed, potentially freeing dozens of victims of his judicial racism. Prosecutor Jennifer Hayes faced disciplinary action from the D.C. Bar Association for her role in manipulating charges. The Heritage coffee shop where Marcus was denied service closed permanently after nationwide boycotts. The promise. As father and son walked down the courthouse steps together, Marcus asked the question that had haunted him for 19 years. Why didn't you ever try to contact me? David stopped walking, looking directly into his son's eyes. Because I was a coward. I thought political success would give me power to help families like ours. But success without family means nothing. I still want to be a lawyer, Marcus said quietly. A prosecutor like you. David smiled, the first genuine smile he had felt in years. Then you'll be the best prosecutor this country has ever seen. You'll fight for justice not because you have to, but because you've lived what injustice feels like. Marcus nodded, understanding flooding his face. His nightmare had become his calling. Will you teach me? Marcus asked. Every day, David promised. Starting now. As the Thompson family walked toward their new future, the courthouse behind them stood as a reminder that justice, though sometimes delayed, will always find its way home. The valedictorian pin on Marcus's lapel caught the setting sun one final time, no longer a symbol of dreams deferred, but of justice restored and a family reunited. Somewhere in federal detention, Harrison Wells stared at concrete walls and finally understood what justice really meant. 6 months later, Judge Harrison Wells stood in federal court wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of black robes. His hands were cuffed behind his back as he faced the same kind of justice he had denied others for 23 years. Harrison Wells, the judge announced, you have pleaded guilty to civil rights violations, judicial misconduct, and conspiracy to deny equal protection under law. I hereby sentence you to 3 years in federal prison and lifetime disbarment from practicing law. The man who had sentenced Marcus Thompson to life for asking for coffee would serve 3 years for destroying dozens of lives through systematic racism. Even in his downfall, privilege softened his consequences. But justice extended beyond Wells's punishment. The Marcus Thompson Initiative, launched by the Department of Justice, identified over 1,200 potentially biased cases nationwide. Federal judicial bias training became mandatory. Civil rights prosecutions increased 340% in the following year. Marcus Thompson enrolled at Harvard Law School with full honors, specializing in civil rights law. His first-year paper, When Justice Wears a Father's Face, became required reading in constitutional law courses across America. During winter break, Marcus interned at the Department of Justice, working alongside his father on criminal justice reform. Their relationship grew stronger daily, built on shared purpose rather than shared time. The deeper truth. On a quiet Sunday morning, David and Marcus sat in Eleanor's kitchen, the same place where Marcus had grown up wondering about his missing father. I learned something that day in court, Marcus said, stirring his coffee slowly. Justice isn't just about punishment, it's about truth. About people in power admitting when they're wrong. David nodded, recognizing the wisdom in his son's words. Your grandmother taught me that. Sometimes the system doesn't fail because of ignorance. Sometimes it fails because people with power let personal prejudices override professional duties. Eleanor smiled from her chair by the window, watching 3 generations of Thompson men finally together. Marcus, baby, you taught both of us something that day. What's that, Grandma? That family isn't just about being present every day. It's about showing up when it matters most. And sometimes, justice comes from the most unexpected places. Marcus looked at his father, this man who had moved heaven and earth to save him. I spent 19 years thinking you abandoned me. But you were always fighting for people like me, even when you didn't know I existed. David's voice was thick with emotion. And you spent 19 years becoming the kind of person I always hoped to protect. Strong, dignified, unafraid to demand justice, even when the system tried to crush you. The ripple effect. The Thompson case changed more than one family. Heritage Coffee's closure sparked nationwide conversations about everyday racism in service industries. The hashtag Life for Coffee movement evolved into advocacy for equal treatment in public accommodations. Ashley Parker, the barista who had denied Marcus service, issued a public apology and enrolled in diversity training. Kyle Morrison, the manager who called police, lost his job and struggled to find work as the story followed him. But the most profound change occurred in courtrooms across America. The Thompson Standard became a legal shorthand for examining judicial bias. Law schools added courses on recognizing unconscious prejudice in legal decision-making. Marcus often spoke at these law schools, sharing his story with future attorneys and judges. That day in court, I learned that the law is only as just as the people who enforce it, he would tell rapt audiences. Judge Wells didn't see a valedictorian or a future lawyer. He saw a stereotype that threatened his worldview, so he tried to destroy it. Students would ask how he survived such injustice without becoming bitter. Because I learned that for every Harrison Wells, there are people willing to fight for what's right. My father, my grandmother, the lawyers who took my case, the activists who refused to let my story be buried. Justice is a team sport. The call to action. Marcus Thompson graduated from Harvard Law with highest honors. His graduation speech was broadcast nationally, a young man who had faced the worst of American justice calling others to create its best. 3 years ago, I was sentenced to life in prison for asking to be treated like a human being, Marcus told the graduating class. Today, I stand before you as proof that in America, truth and justice can still triumph over prejudice and power. He looked directly into the camera, addressing viewers across the nation. But my story isn't unique. Right now, someone is facing discrimination in a coffee shop, a courtroom, or a workplace. Someone is being judged by their appearance rather than their character. Someone needs you to speak up. The audience rose in thunderous applause as Marcus delivered his final challenge. Have you ever wondered what would happen if everyone with privilege used it to protect instead of exclude? If every person with power chose justice over comfort? That's the world I'm working to build. Marcus paused, his voice strong with conviction. The question isn't whether injustice exists. It's whether you'll be part of ending it. Your voice matters. Your actions matter. Your choice to stand up for what's right could change someone's entire life. The camera captured father and son embracing as the ceremony ended, a symbol of justice restored and a family made whole. Final words on screen. Experience discrimination? Document it, report it, share it. Change starts with your voice. $, Life for Coffee. $, Justice for all. $, Your voice matters quote.